The city's most feared mafia boss had survived bullets. He had survived betrayals. He had survived enemies who spent decades trying to kill him. Yet on one quiet morning, his life was saved by the smallest person inside his mansion. As Jack Sterling raised his favorite coffee toward his lips, a tiny voice suddenly broke the silence. "Sir, please don't drink that." The 4-year-old daughter of his housemaid pointed directly at the steaming cup. Jack lowered it slowly. "What did you say?" The little girl looked at him with innocent eyes. "It smells like the medicine Daddy drank before he went to heaven." Within minutes, the coffee tested positive for poison. But discovering poison inside his own home was only the beginning. Because someone Jack had trusted for years had already begun destroying his empire from the inside. And the only witness who unknowingly recognized death was a little girl who remembered a smell no child should ever remember. Jack Sterling built his criminal empire through discipline. Every decision followed a pattern. Every employee underwent exhaustive background checks. Every hallway inside Sterling Manor was monitored. Every visitor was searched. Jack believed preparation defeated luck. It was a lesson carved into him after watching his father die from betrayal decades earlier. He had been 19 years old, hiding behind a wine cellar door, when he heard the gunshot that ended his father's life in the very study where the old man had taught him to play chess. Jack never forgot the sound. He never forgot the silence that came after it. Either the silence a house full of people who had all, in one way or another, known it was coming and said nothing. Since then, he had never allowed anyone close enough to become family. No wife, no children, no friendships, only business, only loyalty, only survival. He built Sterling Manor not as a home, but as a fortress disguised as one. Marble floors polished to a mirror's shine, floor-to-ceiling windows reinforced with laminated glass, and a security system that rivaled a small nation's intelligence agency. Cameras watched every corridor except the private wing where Jack slept, and even that room had 2 exits no architect's blueprint would ever show. He trusted numbers. He trusted patterns. He trusted the men he had personally recruited, trained, and tested through years of quiet loyalty. What Jack did not know, what no algorithm, camera, or background check could have told him, was that someone had quietly spent months studying the only peaceful moment left in his life, his morning coffee. Every day at 7 o'clock, for 15 minutes, Jack Sterling was not a mafia boss. He was simply a man with a newspaper and a warm cup, and it was in that 15 minutes of vulnerability that his enemy had chosen to strike. At the same time, on the other side of the city, Grace Abernathy faced a completely different battle. When her babysitter canceled unexpectedly, she had no choice but to bring her daughter Ellie to work. Grace had already used up every favor, every excuse, every ounce of goodwill from neighbors who might have watched Ellie for an hour. Sterling Manor did not tolerate unreliability, and Grace could not afford to lose the only job that kept a roof over their heads since Daniel died. She promised the little girl they would remain invisible. Stay quiet. Stay close. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Grace believed she could survive just one difficult morning. Instead, that ordinary morning would expose a conspiracy powerful enough to ignite a war. Jack Sterling believed routines kept people alive. Every morning at precisely 7 o'clock, he walked into the sunlit dining room of Sterling Manor, wearing a tailored navy suit, long before the rest of the household stirred. His guards knew better than to disturb him. His staff understood the rules without being reminded. For 15 uninterrupted minutes, the feared mafia boss enjoyed silence, a fresh newspaper, and a single cup of black coffee prepared by the same kitchen staff he had trusted for years. To outsiders, it looked ordinary. To Jack, it was proof that even in a violent world, discipline could create peace. He read the financial section first, then the local news, scanning for names he recognized among the arrests and obituaries. He never spoke during those 15 minutes. He never answered his phone. It was the 1 hour of the day when Jack Sterling allowed himself to simply exist rather than calculate. Across the hall, Grace Abernathy stepped nervously through the service entrance with her 4-year-old daughter, Ellie, holding tightly to her hand. Their babysitter had canceled at the last minute, leaving Grace with an impossible choice: miss work and risk losing the only stable job she had, or bring Ellie into a house filled with dangerous men. She leaned down and whispered, "Stay beside me. Don't wander. Don't speak unless I tell you." Ellie nodded obediently, clutching her small stuffed rabbit against her chest. The rabbit's name was Captain Whiskers, and Daniel had given it to her the week before he died. She rarely let it out of her sight. The morning began smoothly. Grace moved through her usual duties, dusting the east wing, arranging fresh linens, checking that the kitchen staff had everything they needed before the household woke. Ellie sat quietly on an overturned bucket near the laundry room, coloring pictures of dragons on the back of an old receipt. Everything went according to plan until Grace was called into the laundry room to help another employee untangle a jammed industrial washer. For barely a minute, Ellie remained alone in the hallway, quietly watching the elegant dining room through a half-open door. She saw Jack lift a steaming cup. Then something stopped her cold. Her little nose wrinkled. That smell, she had smelled it once before. On the night her father drank a strange medicine before lying down and never waking up again. She remembered the paramedics. She remembered her mother screaming a name over and over. She remembered a smell that lingered in the hallway of their old apartment for days afterward. Sweet and wrong. A smell she had never been able to explain to anyone because she didn't have the words for it. She had the words now. She just didn't know it yet. Without thinking, Ellie hurried into the room. "Sir." Jack looked up, surprised that anyone had interrupted his morning ritual. No child had ever set foot in that dining room during his 15 minutes. No adult would have dared. The little girl pointed at the cup with trembling fingers. "Please don't drink your coffee." The room fell silent. Jack slowly lowered the cup. "And why not?" he asked calmly. Ellie swallowed. "Because it smells like Daddy's medicine." Every guard in the room stiffened. Grace rushed inside, horrified, apologizing over and over as she reached for her daughter. But Jack raised one hand. No. His eyes never left a frightened child. For the first time in years, something deeper than instinct told him to listen. "Have the coffee tested," he ordered quietly. 10 minutes later, the laboratory report arrived. The coffee contained a rare poison designed to imitate a fatal heart attack. Jack stared at the report in silence. Someone hadn't just tried to kill him. Someone had done it from inside his own home. Within minutes, Sterling Manor transformed from a peaceful residence into a fortress under lockdown. Every gate was sealed. Every employee surrendered their phone. Jack Sterling's security team searched every room while technicians carried the poisoned coffee to a private laboratory for further analysis. No one was allowed to leave. The cook who had prepared the coffee, a heavy-set man named Rossi who had worked in the kitchen for 6 years, was questioned first. He wept, insisting he had done nothing differently. He had used the same beans, the same water, the same silver kettle he used every morning. Victor Kane, Jack's security chief, watched the interrogation through a one-way mirror and came away convinced Rossi was telling the truth. Whoever had poisoned the coffee had not touched it in the kitchen. They had touched it somewhere along the 15 feet of hallway between the kitchen and the dining table. Jack stood silently at the head of the dining table, studying the tiny girl who had saved his life. Ellie sat beside her mother, swinging her feet nervously beneath the oversized chair. She wasn't frightened of Jack. She was frightened she had done something wrong. Grace knelt beside her daughter. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling." She doesn't always understand when adults are talking. Jack shook his head. "No." His voice remained calm. She understood something none of us did. He crouched until he was eye level with Ellie. "Can you tell me why you said my coffee smelled like your daddy's medicine?" Ellie hugged her stuffed rabbit tighter. "Daddy got sick after drinking it." "What kind of medicine was it?" "I don't know." She frowned. "Try to remember." "It smelled sweet but funny." Her innocent description caused the laboratory chemist to freeze. He carefully removed his glasses. "Sir." Jack looked up. "This poison contains a synthetic almond compound. Most adults wouldn't notice it after the coffee beans masked the scent." The chemist glanced toward Ellie with visible disbelief. But children often have stronger scent recognition than adults, especially if they associate a smell with a powerful memory. The room fell silent. Jack looked back at Ellie. She hadn't identified poison. She had recognized grief. For a brief moment, the ruthless crime boss saw something beyond a frightened little girl. He saw a child whose happiest memories had been permanently connected to the scent of death. There were some wounds time never truly erased. He straightened, and for a moment something almost like pain crossed his face before he buried it, the way he had buried every soft feeling for 20 years. "Get her something to eat," he told Grace quietly. "She's not in trouble. Neither are you." Grace searched his face for a lie and found none. The laboratory results confirmed something even more disturbing. The poison wasn't homemade. It was military grade, colorless, nearly impossible to detect. Symptoms appeared several hours after ingestion before causing cardiac arrest that looked completely natural. A coroner without reason for suspicion would have signed off on it within the hour. There would have been a funeral, a eulogy, perhaps a brief mention in the newspaper Jack read every morning. And no one outside Sterling Manor would ever have known it was murder. Someone with considerable resources wanted Jack dead without leaving behind a murder investigation. His security chief, Victor Kane, entered carrying a tablet. The kitchen cameras have been reviewed. Jack looked up immediately. Anything? Victor nodded. One gap. What gap? Exactly 43 seconds. Jack's expression hardened. Sterling Manor used multiple backup recording systems. There had never been a missing second, let alone 43. Someone hadn't simply poisoned the coffee. Someone had erased themselves from the cameras. That required inside access. Not just a key card, but knowledge of the redundant systems. Knowledge that only a handful of people in the entire organization possessed. Give me the list, Jack said. Everyone who has clearance to touch those systems. Victor hesitated. Boss, that's 11 people. Some of them have been with you since. I don't care how long they've been with me. Give me the list. Grace felt the color drain from her face. Years ago, she had watched investigators reach the exact same conclusion after her husband's mysterious death. Someone powerful always cleaned up the evidence first. She had spent years convincing herself she had escaped that nightmare. Now she realized it had found her again. Jack noticed the fear in her eyes. You've seen something like this before. Grace hesitated. Her late husband had begged her never to trust powerful men, especially men who claimed they wanted justice. Yet the little girl beside her had already changed everything with one honest sentence. Sometimes the truth finds its own moment, whether we're ready for it or not. Grace slowly lifted her eyes to meet Jack's. I think, she whispered, I know why someone wants you dead. The room became so quiet that even the ticking grandfather clock seemed deafening. Jack's eyes narrowed. For the first time today, he said quietly, I believe we're finally asking the right question. Grace remained silent for several seconds, carefully choosing her next words. She had spent 4 years protecting a secret that had already cost one man his life. Telling Jack Sterling the truth meant there would be no turning back. My husband wasn't sick, she said quietly. He was murdered. Jack folded his arms without interrupting her. My husband's name was Daniel Abernathy. He worked as a forensic accountant for a private shipping company. Grace swallowed. At least, that's what everyone believed. Victor exchanged a glance with Jack. There was more to his job? Grace nodded. Daniel was secretly hired by a federal task force to trace money being laundered through cargo companies. He discovered millions of dollars moving through fake businesses across the East Coast. Jack's expression remained unreadable. And he followed the money. Grace looked directly into his eyes. It eventually led to someone called the broker. The room became still. Even Victor's face changed. Jack slowly leaned forward. How do you know that name? Grace frowned. You've heard it before. Jack gave a slight nod. The broker isn't supposed to exist. For years, intelligence agencies, rival syndicates, and even my own investigators have heard whispers about one man coordinating criminal organizations without ever appearing in public. Some of my own people use a joke. It was a myth invented to explain coincidences no one wanted to take responsibility for. I never believed that. Coincidences don't kill 4 rival lieutenants in the same month using 4 different methods, all trace back to nothing. He exists, Grace replied. Daniel proved it. She reached inside her handbag and carefully removed a worn leather wallet. Hidden beneath an old family photograph was a tiny encrypted memory card. I've carried this every day since my husband died. Jack stared at it. What is it? Everything Daniel managed to copy before they found him. Victor immediately took the card and handed it to one of Jack's cyber specialists. Can you access it? The technician inserted the card into an encrypted laptop. Several security prompts appeared. Then, access denied. It's protected by military-grade encryption, the technician explained. This could take days. Grace shook her head. No. She looked at Ellie, who smiled innocently while coloring on a blank sheet of paper with crayons someone had found for her. My husband left Ellie the password. Everyone looked confused. Victor frowned. A 4-year-old? Grace smiled sadly. Daniel knew they would torture me for information, but no one would ever think to ask a little girl about a bedtime story. Grace walked toward Ellie. Sweetheart, do you remember Daddy's pirate story? Ellie looked up immediately. The one about Captain Blue? Grace nodded. What was the treasure island called? Ellie giggled. Silver Harbor, 721. The technician quickly typed the words. Silver Harbor 721. The laptop unlocked instantly. A heavy silence filled the room. Folders began appearing across the screen. Bank accounts, shipping routes, government officials, judges, police commanders, business executives. Each file revealed another powerful figure secretly accepting payments from the same invisible network. Victor's breathing slowed. This isn't just organized crime. No, Jack replied quietly. It's an organized society. Then another file appeared. Its title froze everyone in the room. Jack's eyes narrowed. Someone inside his own empire had been feeding information to the broker for years. The file contained payment records dating back nearly 12 years. Each transfer corresponded with one of Jack's failed operations, intercepted shipments, or assassinated allies. Jack recognized dates he had never been able to explain. The ambush at the harbor that cost him 6 men, the shipment that vanished off the coast of Charleston, the rival boss who somehow always knew where Jack's people would be before Jack's people knew it themselves. The betrayal hadn't started yesterday. It had shaped his entire reign. Victor slowly looked around the room. If this file is real... It is, Grace interrupted. My husband died trying to protect it. Jack closed the laptop and looked out the dining room window. For years, he believed his greatest enemy stood outside his gates. Now he understood a truth that many powerful people learn too late. The strongest walls in the world cannot protect you when the danger has already been invited inside. Without turning around, Jack spoke calmly. Lock down every financial record, every communication log, and every member of my inner circle. Victor nodded. You think the traitor is still here? Jack's reflection stared back from the glass. I don't think so. I know. And somewhere inside Sterling Manor, the traitor had just realized the hunt had begun. Jack Sterling had learned a painful truth early in life. When a snake realizes you've discovered its hiding place, it doesn't wait to be hunted. It strikes first. That was why he refused to arrest anyone inside Sterling Manor. Not yet. If there truly was a traitor buried within his organization, exposing them too soon would only warn the people pulling the strings. Instead, Jack intended to let them believe their plan was succeeding. He turned away from the window and looked at Victor Kane. Tell no one about the files. Victor nodded. And the staff? They continue exactly as they always have. Grace looked confused. But if someone inside this house tried to poison you, they'll try again, Jack finished. And when they do, they'll show us who's giving the orders. Grace wasn't convinced. That sounds dangerous. Jack gave a faint smile. Danger is predictable. Panic isn't. He explained it the way his father once explained it to him. Decades ago, over a chessboard neither of them ever finished. A hunted man who feels safe will eventually reach for the thing he thinks no one is watching. A hunted man who feels cornered will burn the house down rather than be caught inside it. Jack intended to make the traitor feel safe for exactly as long as it took to identify them, and not one moment longer. Within hours, Sterling Manor returned to what appeared to be normal life. The cooks prepared meals. Gardeners trimmed hedges. Security guards rotated shifts. Even Jack resumed his daily meetings as though nothing unusual had happened. But hidden behind every ordinary routine was extraordinary surveillance. Victor quietly replaced dozens of security cameras, with newer models invisible to the naked eye. He worked with only 2 men he trusted absolutely, installing devices small enough to fit inside light fixtures and picture frames. Devices that fed directly into a private server Jack kept in a room even Victor's own men didn't know existed. Every telephone call made from the estate was copied. Every email was intercepted. Every vehicle entering or leaving the property was tracked. Jack wasn't watching for criminals anymore. He was watching for patterns. His father had once told him that people rarely betray themselves through dramatic mistakes. They betray themselves through habits. A habit repeated long enough eventually becomes confession. Grace, meanwhile, found herself in an unfamiliar position. Jack had insisted she and Ellie remain in the manor rather than return to their small apartment across town. Not as prisoners, he clarified, but as guests until the investigation concluded. Grace didn't trust the sudden hospitality, not from a man like Jack Sterling, but she trusted even less the idea of Ellie sleeping in a building within locks and no guards, not after what had happened that morning. Ellie, for her part, adjusted far more easily than her mother. Within a day, she had discovered the manor's enormous library, its koi pond, and a groundskeeper named Otis who let her help him water the roses. She still carried Captain Whiskers everywhere, and she still occasionally asked Grace when they could go home. But the fear that gripped her that first morning slowly gave way to a child's natural curiosity about a very strange, very large house. Late that evening, Victor entered Jack's office carrying a tablet. We've already found something. Jack looked up. Show me. Victor replayed footage from one of the hidden cameras installed that afternoon. At exactly 8:17 p.m., the state's senior household manager, Harold Whitmore, quietly entered the records room. Nothing unusual. Harold had worked with the Sterling family for nearly 18 years. He had managed household staff since Jack's father was still alive. He had been the one to comfort a 19-year-old Jack on the night of his father's murder, the one who quietly handled the funeral arrangements, while Jack sat in stunned silence for 3 days. Everyone trusted Harold. Jack himself would have said, only a week earlier, that Harold Whitmore was the last man on Earth capable of betrayal. The video continued. Harold removed a small envelope from behind an old filing cabinet. Instead of opening it, he slipped it into his jacket before leaving through the servants' corridor. Jack watched without speaking. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that the footage meant anything to him at all. "Where did he go?" he finally asked. Victor tapped another screen. "He never left the property." "Then where's the envelope now?" Victor enlarged another image. It disappeared. Jack narrowed his eyes. "No." Victor looked confused. "No. People don't hide evidence unless someone is coming to collect it." At that exact moment, another guard rushed into the office. "Boss!" Victor turned. "What happened?" "We found one of the gardeners climbing over the north wall." "Did you catch him?" The guard hesitated. "No, sir. He was already dead." Silence filled the room. Jack immediately stood. "Take me there." Minutes later, floodlights illuminated the rear gardens. The gardener lay face down beneath the stone wall. There were no bullet wounds, no stab wounds, no visible injuries at all. The estate physician carefully examined the body before looking toward Jack. "He died less than 5 minutes ago." "What killed him?" The doctor gently opened the man's mouth. A faint smell drifted into the cold night air. Sweet, almost like almonds. Grace, standing several feet away with Ellie asleep in her arms, suddenly covered her mouth. It's the same smell. The doctor's expression darkened. "Cyanide capsule." Jack looked toward the wall. The gardener hadn't been escaping. He had been silenced before anyone could question him. Victor crouched beside the body, checking the man's pockets. He found a burner phone, its screen still glowing faintly with an incoming call that had gone unanswered. The caller ID read only a string of numbers. He was supposed to report something, Victor said. And instead of waiting to find out what, whoever's on the other end of this decided he wasn't worth the risk. Jack's face was unreadable in the floodlights. "Whoever's running this operation treats their own people like Rossi treats his kitchen scraps," he said quietly. "Something used once, then thrown away." Someone outside the estate knew their operation had been compromised, which meant communication was still flowing through Sterling Manor. Victor stepped closer. "The leak is active." Jack nodded slowly. "And whoever's running it has no problem killing their own people." He looked back toward the house, toward the warm windows where Grace stood holding her sleeping daughter, and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Urgency that wasn't about power, but about protecting people who had nothing to do with his war. Back inside the mansion, the cyber team finally decrypted another folder from Daniel Abernathy's memory card. Unlike the financial records, this folder contained photographs. Dozens of them. Most showed shipping containers, private airfields, luxury hotels, political fundraisers. Then one photograph appeared that made Jack's blood run cold. It showed his father standing beside another man at a charity gala nearly 20 years earlier. The two men were laughing at something outside the frame. Champagne glasses raised, the kind of photograph Society page might have run without a second thought. The second man's face had been circled in red. Written beneath it were 4 simple words. Before anyone could enlarge the image, every computer screen inside the room suddenly went black. The lights flickered. Emergency alarms began echoing throughout Sterling Manor. Victor reached for his weapon. "We've lost power." A security officer's voice crackled over the radio. "Boss, we got multiple vehicles approaching the front gate." Another voice interrupted. "South fence breached." Then another. "Gunmen inside the east courtyard." Jack looked toward Grace and Ellie. "They're here." For the first time that night, he realized something chilling. The poison coffee had never been the real assassination attempt. It had only been bait. The true objective had always been to lure him into uncovering Daniel Abernathy's files. Because someone was desperate to make sure Jack never learned the identity hidden inside that final photograph. The emergency generators roared to life just seconds after the power failed, bathing Sterling Manor in dim amber light. The silence that followed was more unsettling than the alarms. Jack Sterling had spent decades surviving ambushes, and experience had taught him one lesson that never failed. When an enemy suddenly goes quiet, they're preparing something worse. Victor Kane checked the security monitor powered by the backup system. "They're pulling back," he said. Jack frowned. "No." Victor looked at him. "They're repositioning." Outside, the armed men who had stormed the estate moments earlier were retreating toward the tree line without firing another shot. It made no sense. A professional assault team never abandoned an attack unless the mission had already been completed. Jack's heart sank. The files. The cyber technician quickly restarted the computer systems. Most of Daniel Abernathy's documents were intact, but the final folder, the one containing the circled photograph labeled the broker, real identity, had vanished completely. "It was remotely erased," the technician said. "Someone accessed our network during the blackout." Grace lowered her head. "Daniel warned me this could happen." Jack turned toward her. "He built a fail-safe, didn't he?" She nodded slowly. "My husband never trusted computers." She reached into Ellie's backpack and unstitched a small section of the rabbit's worn fabric. Hidden inside was a tiny brass key. Jack stared at it in disbelief. "Ellie has been carrying that the whole time?" Grace smiled sadly. "Daniel said the safest vault in the world was the one no criminal would ever think to search." Sometimes the greatest protection isn't building stronger locks. It's hiding something in plain sight. Victor, still watching the monitors, spoke without turning. "Boss, if the attack tonight was only meant to force a network breach, that means someone here fed them the exact timing of our power grid maintenance. That's not public information. That's a schedule only 6 people in this house have access to." Jack's expression hardened further. "Then our list just got shorter. Harold's on it." Victor said quietly, "I know. You want me to bring him in?" Jack shook his head. "Not yet, if Harold is a leak. He still thinks we don't know. The moment we move on him, whoever's above him disappears. I want the whole chain, Victor, not just the weakest link in it." The key opened an old safety deposit box beneath the floorboards of a forgotten chapel where Grace and Daniel had married years before. Jack insisted on going himself. An hour later, they arrived at the abandoned stone church just before sunrise. Dust floated through broken stained glass windows as Grace unlocked a small iron box hidden beneath the altar. Inside lay a leather journal, several photographs, and one sealed envelope. Jack opened the envelope first. His expression changed instantly. Victor noticed. "What is it?" Jack silently handed him the photograph. Victor's eyes widened. "No." The man standing beside Jack's late father wasn't simply an associate. He was Charles Sterling, Jack's own uncle, the man who had disappeared overseas 20 years earlier after claiming he wanted nothing to do with the family's criminal empire. Jack remembered him only vaguely. A tall man with a quiet laugh who used to bring him chess sets from countries Jack couldn't find on a map, who had vanished not long after Jack's father's murder, supposedly unable to bear staying in the city that had cost him his brother. Jack had grieved that loss too, in his own quiet way. One more member of his shrinking family gone before he'd had the chance to really know him. Now he understood why Charles had really left. Grace carefully opened Daniel's journal. The final pages explained everything. Charles Sterling had secretly created an international network that profited by manipulating rival crime families into destroying one another rather than ruling through violence. He controlled information, betrayal, and fear. Every assassination, every financial collapse, every gang war increased his influence while keeping his own hands clean. He wasn't merely another mafia boss. He was the invisible architect behind them all. The journal detailed how Charles had arranged his own brother's murder 20 years earlier, not out of hatred, Daniel had written, but because Jack's father had discovered what his brother was building and refused to be part of it. Charles had removed the one obstacle in his path and then disappeared into legend, letting the world believe grief had driven him away, while he quietly built an empire from the shadows using the very organization his murdered brother had left behind. Jack closed the journal. "For 20 years, my own blood has been feeding this city to wolves." He sat down heavily on the edge of a pew that hadn't held a wedding guest in years, and for a moment he looked less like the most feared man in the city and more like the 19-year-old boy who had hidden behind a cellar door while his father died. Victor asked the question weighing on everyone's mind. "What now?" Jack looked at Ellie, who was peacefully sleeping against Grace's shoulder, completely unaware that she had carried the key capable of exposing one of the most dangerous men alive. Then he smiled. "Now we finish what Daniel started." 2 days later, With the journal's contents cross-referenced against the financial files from Daniel's memory card, Jack finally understood the shape of the network Charles Sterling had built. Harold Whitmore was not the mastermind. He was, as Jack had suspected, only the weakest link in a much longer chain, a man who had been quietly blackmailed 11 years earlier over a gambling debt he could never have repaid on a household manager's salary, and who spent every year since delivering small envelopes to a contact he never met in person, telling himself each time that it would be the last. Jack summoned him to the same dining room where the coffee had been poisoned. Harold entered slowly, and the moment he saw Jack's face, something in him seemed to collapse. "I never wanted any of this," he said, before Jack had spoken a single word. They had photographs, debts. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd send everything to police and to you, both at once, and I'd lose everything I built here in one afternoon. And instead you decided to help them kill me. Harold's hands trembled. I told myself it was only information, schedules, nothing that could hurt anyone directly. I told myself that for 11 years. He looked up, eyes wet. "The coffee wasn't me, Mr. Sterling. I swear it on my life. I didn't know they'd try that. When I found out, I panicked. That's the envelope Victor's people caught on camera. I was trying to leave a warning for my contact that I wanted out." Jack studied him for a long moment. He had known Harold Whitmore for 18 years. He had eaten breakfast across from him more mornings than he could count. Somewhere in him, a part of the boy who had once needed Harold's comfort wanted desperately to believe him. "Who is your contact?" Jack asked quietly. "I never saw a face, only ever a voice on a phone, and envelopes left in places I was told to check." Harold swallowed. "But 2 nights ago, for the first time, they gave me a name. They said if anything went wrong, I was to reach a man called Emil Voss." Victor, standing by the door, went very still. "Voss runs Charles Sterling's overseas shipping fronts," he said. "If Harold's contact answers to him, that's the first solid thread we've had that leads all the way up." Jack didn't waste time on anger. Anger, he had learned long ago, was a tool for men who could afford to lose. "You'll cooperate fully," he told Harold. "Every name, every contact, every account you know of. And in exchange, you and your family will be protected from whoever comes looking for you when they realize you've talked." Harold nodded, weeping openly now, and for the first time in 11 years, looked like a man who had finally put down a weight he could no longer carry alone. The information Harold provided led Jack's people to a shipping office on the waterfront registered under 3 shell companies, all eventually tracing back to a man named Emil Voss, officially a logistics consultant, unofficially the closest thing Charles Sterling had to a lieutenant on this side of the ocean. Jack didn't send soldiers. He went himself, with Victor and 2 men he absolutely trusted, arriving not with guns drawn, but with an offer. Voss was a lean, unhurried man in his 50s who didn't seem particularly surprised to see Jack Sterling standing in his office doorway. "I wondered how long it would take," he said, setting down his pen. "Charles said you were more careful than your father. I told him careful men take longer, not never." "Where is he?" Jack asked. "Know where you can reach him tonight." Voss folded his hands. "But I'll tell you what I told the last 3 men who asked me that question, and didn't like my answer. Charles doesn't run from strength, Mr. Sterling. He runs from exposure. That's the only thing that's ever frightened him. Not bullets, not betrayal. The idea of his own name being spoken in a courtroom." Jack leaned forward. "Then you understand exactly what I'm about to do." Voss studied him for a long moment. Then, to Victor's visible surprise, allowed a thin smile. "You're not here to kill me. If you were, I'd already be dead. You're here because you want this to end quietly, in ledgers and headlines, not gunfire." He exhaled. "You're more like your father than Charles ever wanted to admit." In the end, Voss didn't confess out of loyalty or fear. He confessed because, as he put it, he had spent 30 years building an organization on the assumption that Charles Sterling was untouchable, and Daniel Abernathy's files had already proven that assumption wrong. "A smart man," Voss said, "recognizes when the ground has shifted and adjusts his footing before he falls." He handed over 3 encrypted drives of his own. Over the following weeks, Jack abandoned the methods that had built his empire. Instead of launching another bloody war, he quietly delivered Daniel's evidence, along with everything recovered from Harold and Voss, to honest investigators, independent journalists, and financial crime agencies across several countries. 1 organization could be bribed. 100 could not. Truth, when shared widely enough, becomes almost impossible to bury. Charles Sterling disappeared before authorities could arrest him, slipping across a border on a passport under a name even Voss hadn't known about. But his financial empire collapsed piece by piece. Politicians resigned. Corrupt executives were prosecuted. Offshore accounts were frozen. Entire criminal networks imploded after realizing they had all been manipulated by the same unseen hand. Harold Whitmore testified quietly, under protection, and was never publicly named. Jack kept his promise. Harold's family was never touched, though Harold himself chose to leave Sterling Manor for good once it was over, unable to look Jack in the eye any longer despite the forgiveness he'd been given. Jack understood something that years of violence had never taught him. Fear can force people to obey, but truth has the power to make entire empires collapse. Months later, Sterling Manor looked different. Children's drawings decorated the refrigerator. Ellie's laughter echoed through hallways once filled only with guarded silence. Grace had stopped looking over her shoulder every time someone knocked at the door. She had also, somewhat to her own surprise, stopped thinking of Sterling Manor as a place she worked and started, quietly, to think of it as somewhere she and Ellie belonged. Jack had never asked her to stay. He hadn't needed to. There are homes people choose because the roof doesn't leak, and there are homes people choose because for the first time in years, they can breathe inside them, and Grace had realized somewhere along the way that Sterling Manor had become the second kind for her daughter. One quiet morning, Jack sat in the same dining room where everything had begun. The housekeeper placed a fresh cup of black coffee before him. Jack smiled. He didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he looked toward Ellie. She giggled. "I checked it already." Everyone around the table laughed. For the first time in many years, Jack laughed with them, not because the danger was completely gone. Charles Sterling was still out there somewhere, and Jack knew better than most that men like his uncle rarely stayed buried for good, but because he had finally discovered something more valuable than absolute control. People worth protecting. As sunlight poured to the dining room windows, Jack slowly lifted the coffee cup that had once symbolized loneliness and suspicion. Now it represents trust. He took a sip. It tasted exactly as it should. Warm, simple, ordinary. Sometimes the greatest victories don't arrive with gunfire or applause. Sometimes they begin with one child finding the courage to speak, one grieving mother refusing to surrender the truth, and one broken man learning that real strength isn't measured by how many people fear you, but by how many feel safe because you're there. And on that quiet morning, Jack Sterling knew he had finally won the battle that mattered most.